The stadium was empty, bathed in the soft glow of dim lights reflecting off the polished floor. Rihanna walked slowly across the stage, savoring the rare moment of silence before the storm of spotlights and applause. But then an unexpected sound broke the stillness. A voice. It wasn't a sound check, but a trembling voice, imperfect yet strangely powerful, filled with emotion. Unable to resist, Rihanna sought out the source of the voice. In a hidden corner of the stadium, she discovered a young janitor, pregnant with child, her hands gripping a broom, singing her song. It was a voice of sorrow, of hope, and a story Rihanna knew she could never ignore. This moment would not only change how she viewed the stage, but it would leave an indelible emotional imprint on you as well. The story begins. Rihanna stood motionless in the vast expanse of the stadium, a silence enveloping the space, only punctuated by the soft hum of the ventilation and the distant sound of stage lights being tested. The rows of empty seats surrounded the stage like silent pillars, waiting for the energy that would soon fill them. Rihanna stepped out from the dimly lit hallway, each step echoing gently on the polished concrete floor. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the vast space she knew so well. This was the quiet before the storm, before the applause, the lights, and the music would soon reverberate in every corner of this place. In this moment, before the frantic preparations began, she found herself alone, a rare stillness where she could take a deep breath and remind herself of the journey that had brought her here. The weight of expectation was always there. The fans, the critics, the producers, they all expected perfection, brilliance, and magic from her. Rihanna lived with that, but sometimes the pressure felt like a taut string stretched over a chasm, requiring her to maintain balance, to not waver, not falter. She moved toward the stage, her fingers lightly grazing the back of a chair, the air carrying the faint smell of fresh paint and cleaning products, a reminder that behind the brilliance of the performances, there was an entire team of unseen workers ensuring every detail was flawless. And then she heard it, a voice. At first, it was faint, almost a whisper, echoing in the vast space, but something in the voice made Rihanna stop in her tracks. She turned her head slightly, listening. This wasn't the sound check, it hadn't even started. And this voice wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't a smooth performance. It was raw, unpolished, full of emotion and beauty that made her heart ache. Rihanna ascended the steps, the sound of her heels no longer audible as she moved toward the upper rows. The voice grew clearer, a woman singing one of Rihanna's own songs, but not to perform. The trembling notes, the emotion soaked in each word, filled the stillness like a confession. When Rihanna reached the upper rows, she finally saw the woman. A young woman stood in the corner, dressed in an old, gray janitor's uniform, mopping the floor. She was pregnant, her round belly evident beneath the loose fabric. Her skin was glistening with sweat, stray strands of hair falling from her bun, sticking to her forehead. She moved with practiced precision, gripping the broom with the steady hands of someone who had done this work countless times, but her voice carried a vulnerability that her body tried to hide. The woman didn't recognize Rihanna at first. She kept singing, her voice gently sliding into the chorus, sweet and raw, making Rihanna shiver. For a moment, Rihanna didn't want to interrupt. She wanted the song to continue, to listen to every word that echoed the story of someone else. But then, the woman turned and froze, the broom slipping from her hand slightly, her eyes wide with disbelief as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Rihanna stepped closer, smiling softly. "It's okay," Rihanna said quietly, hoping to ease the tension on the woman's face. But the woman stepped back, her expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief, torn between embarrassment and shock. "I didn't know anyone was here," the woman stammered, her voice now small, no longer melodic, as if shrinking into herself, wishing to disappear. "It's fine," Rihanna said again, her smile unwavering. "I just heard you sing. You have a beautiful voice." The woman blushed, gripping the broom like a lifeline. "I was just cleaning," she said hurriedly, her gaze dropping to the soapy mop bucket at her feet. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." "You're not disturbing me," Rihanna answered gently. Rihanna smiled again, softly asking, "What's your name?" Emily hesitated, her shoulders tense as if bracing for reprimand. "Emily," she finally replied. Rihanna nodded. "It's nice to meet you, Emily." A moment of silence passed, broken only by the distant hum of the stadium lights. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her eyes cast downward. "You sing like someone who's done this before," Rihanna said quietly. Emily quickly shook her head, but the expression on her face betrayed her denial. "No, I was just kidding, it's nothing," she said, but there was something in her voice, a crack that held a vulnerability Rihanna could sense. Rihanna stepped closer, lowering herself onto a chair and gesturing for Emily to sit with her. "Sit down for a moment, you don't have to clean the floor while we talk." Emily hesitated for a moment, but eventually set the broom aside and sat down, 2 chairs away from Rihanna. She placed her hand on her thigh, twisting her fingers in a familiar nervous habit. For the first time, Rihanna noticed the exhaustion in Emily's posture. Her shoulders slightly slumped, the dark circles under her eyes, and the way she kept her hand on her lower back as if trying to soothe a pain that never fully went away. "How long have you been pregnant?" Rihanna asked gently, glancing at Emily's belly. 6 months, Emily replied. Rihanna nodded, letting the answer hang between them. She wanted to ask more, but something told her not to press too hard. Instead, Rihanna waited, and after a long silence, Emily began to speak. Her voice started soft, as if afraid to share too much, but her words gradually flowed, the pieces of her story tumbling out like water through a crack in a dam. She spoke of growing up with a love for music, of trying to join a local girl group but being rejected because of her dark skin. She spoke of her mother falling ill, of having to give up everything to care for her. She spoke of the man who promised to stay but left when he found out she was pregnant, and now, she carried this child. Alone, working tirelessly to support herself and her sick mother. Rihanna listened, her heart sinking with every word. She could see the pain in Emily's eyes, the tremor in her voice as she spoke of the doors that had slammed shut before her, but Rihanna also saw something else, strength. Emily had weathered every trial, and despite it all, she still stood firm, still sang. When Emily fell silent, Rihanna felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to say something comforting, to ease the pain, but instead, she simply reached out and gently touched Emily's hand. "You don't have to do this alone," Rihanna said, her voice soft and soothing. Emily looked at her, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and for the first time that evening, a glimmer of hope flickered across her face. Emily sat still, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the broom resting against the chair beside her. She seemed ready to run at any moment, but something in Rihanna's calmness kept her rooted. Rihanna's words still lingered in the air, gentle and sincere. Rihanna gave Emily time. She understood how fragile these moments were. Emily had just cracked open the door to her past, but stepping fully inside would require courage. Rihanna remained silent, offering only the quiet assurance of her presence, not pushing, not rushing. After a long pause, Emily spoke again. Her voice was now softer, as though she had shed some of the burden within, though still feeling exposed. "I wasn't always just mopping floors," Emily began, her eyes drifting to a distant spot in the stadium. "I used to sing, not just around the house or in church, but really sing." Rihanna leaned forward slightly, her concern evident in her expression. She had sensed it the moment Emily's voice had broken through the silence. There was a story, a history woven into each note. Emily shifted in her chair, gently tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "When I was 16, I auditioned for a girl group," she said, her voice wavering at first, but growing stronger as the memory resurfaced. "They were supposed to be the next big thing. I spent a whole week rehearsing, skipped school just to practice." Emily's lips curved into a faint smile, one that flashed and vanished quickly. "I did well at the audition," she said, a fleeting pride in her voice before it was overtaken by fatigue. "I knew it, and the people in the room knew it, even the judges." Rihanna felt a sharp pang in her chest, as though she already knew where this story was headed. "But after I finished singing, one of them pulled me aside. He said I had talent, but—" Emily paused, her fist clenching. "He said I didn't have the right look, said I was too dark, too plain, and wouldn't fit the image they wanted." Rihanna took a deep breath, as if those words had pierced her too. She knew that feeling of rejection, how it gnawed at your confidence and made you question your own worth. Emily's voice grew harder. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, but it mattered. Every time I looked in the mirror and saw what they saw, someone not good enough, not pretty enough, not light enough. Her shoulders sagged, as if all the strength had drained from her body. Then I stopped singing, stopped trying. I thought, if the whole world had decided who I was, what was the point of fighting it? Rihanna's heart ached as she listened. She too had faced challenges in her career, but Emily's story was a stark reminder of how deep-seated discrimination could be, how it could silence voices before they even had the chance to rise. Then what happened? Rihanna asked gently. Emily sighed, leaning back in her chair, one hand subconsciously resting on her stomach. My mother got sick, she said, her voice slowing. It started with small things like forgetting where she left the keys, missing appointments, and gradually it got worse. The doctors said she has early-stage memory loss. She can't work anymore, can't take care of herself. Her voice faltered, and she paused to steady herself. I dropped everything, school, music, friends. I gave it all up so I could be with her. I don't mind, she's my mother. She raised me on her own and did everything for me. Taking care of her is the least I can do. Rihanna gently placed her hand on Emily's arm, but Emily continued, her voice lowering. But it's not easy, she said. Bills, medications, doctors, rent. I do all kinds of jobs, but none of them last. People don't want to hire someone who has to take frequent time off or leave early to care for a sick person. Emily looked down at her worn-out shoes, her voice barely above a whisper. Then I met him, Nathan. He made me feel like things could be different, like I wasn't just surviving. We talked about building a life together, a family. And when I told him I was pregnant, Emily stopped, her throat tight, her eyes brimming with tears. He said he wasn't ready for a family, said he couldn't handle it. And then he left, just like that. Rihanna felt a surge of anger. She knew men like Nathan, those who promised the world but disappeared the moment things got tough. Emily quickly wiped her eyes, as if embarrassed to have cried in front of Rihanna. I don't have time to break down, she said. I have to keep working. I have to keep a roof over my mother's head and now for the baby. She glanced down at her stomach, gently rubbing it. So here I am, mopping floors and singing to myself when no one's around, trying not to think about what could have been. A silence filled the space, thick with the unsaid pain Emily had carried until this moment. But Rihanna saw more than just the pain. She saw resilience. You haven't given up, Rihanna said after a pause. No matter what life throws at you, you're still standing. Emily gave a weak, fleeting smile. Doesn't feel like I've accomplished much, she murmured. But you have, Rihanna insisted. You're still here, still fighting, and I can hear that in your voice. You still have something left to say. Emily shook her head, but her lips twitched, almost willing to believe Rihanna's words. Maybe before, she said quietly, but not anymore. You're wrong, Rihanna said firmly, her voice both strong and gentle. You're wrong and I'm going to prove it to you. Emily looked at her, surprised. What are you talking about? Rihanna smiled, determination flashing in her eyes. Trust me, she said. You're not done, Emily. You're so far from being finished. Emily didn't respond immediately, but something in her eyes shifted. A flicker of hope appeared where only resignation had been before. And for the first time in a long time, Emily allowed herself to wonder if there might still, just maybe, be room for a dream to bloom. Emily's fingers trembled as she gripped the hem of her jacket, standing outside the small community center, looking at the faded sign on the door. It wasn't grand or impressive, just an old brick building with peeling paint and uneven windows. But to her, it felt like the threshold to something unknown and terrifying. Rihanna had assured her this was just the beginning, the first step toward reclaiming a life Emily had thought was out of reach. But standing there, her stomach in knots from anxiety, Emily felt exposed, as though everyone inside could see her pregnancy, her exhaustion, her old clothes, and immediately judge her as unworthy. But she wasn't alone. Rihanna stood beside her, casually dressed in jeans and a sweater, her hair loosely tied back in a bun. Despite her simple appearance, she exuded warmth, not intimidation. Rihanna smiled at Emily, a soothing smile that calmed her sharp anxiety. "Are you ready?" Rihanna asked. Emily inhaled, the lump in her throat growing. Could she really step inside and risk being rejected again, told she wasn't good enough? She glanced down at her stomach, placing a hand protectively over it. "I don't know," she whispered. Rihanna gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You don't have to be perfect today. You just have to show up." Emily swallowed hard, nodded, then followed Rihanna inside. The small rehearsal room carried the scent of wood oil and sheet music. A group of singers stood in a loose circle, chatting and warming up their voices. Emily's heart raced as their eyes flickered towards her, sizing her up. Rihanna stepped forward, speaking with the woman who was leading the group, a middle-aged woman with curly hair and an unyielding expression. They exchanged a few words before the woman gestured for Emily to come closer. "This is Emily," Rihanna said, her tone calm and confident. "She's here to audition." The woman raised an eyebrow. "An audition, huh?" She scanned Emily from head to toe, and Emily fought to keep herself from shrinking under her scrutiny. "She's really good," Rihanna said, leaving no room for doubt. Emily wanted to protest, wanted to say she wasn't ready, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, the woman handed her a sheet of music and pointed to the piano. "Go ahead," she said. Emily's knees trembled as she stepped into the center of the room. She smoothed her clothes, feeling each crease in the fabric. The piano began its first chords, and for a terrifying moment, Emily forgot how to breathe. But then she closed her eyes, letting herself imagine she was alone in an empty stadium, singing only for herself. Her voice began softly, uncertain and fragile, but as the melody wrapped around her, she felt the tension begin to lift. She clung to the lyrics, letting them carry her through. When the chorus came, something shifted. Her voice suddenly found strength, an unexpected power she didn't realize she still had. The room seemed to shrink, and for the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was truly alive. When the final note faded, Emily opened her eyes. The room was silent, and then, slowly, the director nodded. "You've got talent," she said. "We'll need to work on control, but the natural talent is there." Emily's chest tightened. Could this be acceptance? "You're on the team," the director added. Emily blinked, unable to believe her ears. "Wait, what did you say?" "You're on the team," the woman repeated. "Rehearsals are Monday and Thursday. Don't be late." Emily barely heard the rest of the words. She turned to Rihanna, her eyes filling with tears. "I told you," Rihanna said gently. "Just needed a chance." The days that followed were a blur of rehearsals and late-night vocal practices. Emily pushed herself harder than ever, rediscovering her voice and relearning parts of herself that had been buried under years of fear and sacrifice. But it wasn't easy. There were nights when she was so exhausted she could hardly go on, when the weight of her pregnancy and family responsibilities felt too heavy to bear. She still had to work at the stadium, mopping floors and scrubbing toilets to afford food. Her mother's health continued to decline, and medical bills piled up each week. Emily often wondered if she was being selfish, chasing her dream while so much in her life seemed to be falling apart. But Rihanna never let her give up. When Emily's voice went hoarse during a rehearsal, Rihanna stayed late to coach her through it. When Emily doubted herself, Rihanna reminded her of the reasons she started in the first place. And when Emily broke down in tears after a difficult night with her mother, Rihanna was there, offering soothing words and solutions Emily had never dared to dream of. One evening after a grueling rehearsal, Emily found Rihanna waiting for her outside the community center, holding an envelope. "What's this?" Emily asked, wiping sweat from her brow. Rihanna met her gaze with steady resolve, her eyes glowing in the soft evening light. "Help," Rihanna replied simply, with no need for further explanation. Emily opened the envelope and froze. Inside was information about a medical assistance program that covered her mother's treatment, already paid in full. She stared at the paper, then looked back at Rihanna, her heart clenched. Tears filled Emily's eyes. "I can't accept this," she said, her voice trembling, not out of pride but disbelief. Rihanna stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Emily's shoulder. Her voice was resolute, yet warm. "You can." Emily looked into Rihanna's eyes, overwhelmed with emotion, as if a weight she had carried for so long had been lifted. Rihanna spoke again, her tone soft but certain. "You don't have to do this alone, Emily. Not anymore." Emily said nothing, merely nodding quietly. Tears suddenly flowed, but this time, they weren't tears of despair, they were tears of gratitude. For the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to believe that this might actually be real. A few weeks later, Emily stood in the recording studio that Rihanna had arranged for her. She stared at the microphone, her reflection appearing in the glass separating her from the control room. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her headphones, but when the music started, she let herself sink into the rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And when her voice resonated through the room, Emily felt a profound shift inside. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was reclaiming pieces of herself and building something new. The first few weeks felt like a dream, a whirlwind of rehearsals, recording sessions, and encouragement from Rihanna. For the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to hope. Every morning, she woke up with something to look forward to, a reminder that she was more than just a struggling single mother. However, the dream, as Emily quickly realized, couldn't erase reality. The back pain grew worse as her pregnancy progressed, making it harder to complete her shifts cleaning at the stadium. Her manager at the cleaning company began paying more attention to her, complaining that it took her too long to finish her tasks because she couldn't move as quickly as before. One afternoon, after her shift, Emily was called into the supervisor's office. "I need to talk to you about your work performance," the supervisor said, his tone sharp and cold. Emily's stomach tightened. She knew this was coming. "I've received complaints that you take too many breaks," he continued, "and some of the other staff say you leave your work unfinished." Emily opened her mouth to protest, but paused. What could she say? That her legs hurt so much by the end of the day she could barely stand, that she skipped meals to save energy and still couldn't finish the work? Instead, she nodded. "I'll try harder." The supervisor didn't seem convinced. "I need results, Emily, or else." He didn't finish the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. Emily left the office, feeling as if a weight had been strapped to her chest. When she got home, her mother's condition had worsened. Her memory loss left her confused and restless, constantly asking Emily the same questions. Where they were, why Emily's stomach was so big. Emily answered over and over, until tears started to fall. She sat on the edge of the couch, her head resting on her hand, letting the tears fall for the pregnancy she hadn't planned, for the dreams she had dared to hope again, and for the suffocating fear that it would all fall apart before she could do anything. But the next morning, Emily forced herself out of bed and went to rehearsal. By the third week, the exhaustion was becoming obvious. Emily's performances began to falter, struggling to hit the notes that just days before had been so easy to reach. She noticed the glances exchanged among the other singers in the group, pity and doubt. During a break, one of the girls approached her. She was young, stylish, and confident, the kind of woman Emily had once dreamed of being. "Are you okay?" the girl asked, her tone polite but distant. Emily tried to smile, attempting to appear natural. "Yeah, just tired," she answered, but inside she couldn't help but worry. Was anyone noticing the deep exhaustion within her? The girl didn't seem convinced. "Listen, I'm not trying to be rude, but maybe you should take a break and come back when you're ready," she said, her voice soft yet firm. The girl's words felt like a slap to Emily's face. A discomfort spread across her chest. Emily felt her throat tighten. She wanted to scream that she didn't have time to rest, that this wasn't just a hobby or a passion project, but a lifeline as everything else crumbled around her. But she said nothing, only clamped her mouth shut and turned away. The words caught in her throat, leaving only heavy silence. Rihanna noticed the change immediately. After rehearsal, she pulled Emily aside. "What's going on?" Rihanna asked gently. Emily tried to brush it off, saying she was fine, just tired. But Rihanna wasn't easily convinced. "Tell me," she said, her voice softer. "Is something wrong?" Emily hesitated, Then the words came rushing out. The struggles at work, the mounting bills, the way people looked at her as though she didn't belong there. "I'm trying," Emily said, her voice choking. "I'm trying so hard, but no matter what I do, it never seems to be enough, and I'm afraid I'll lose everything before I even get a chance to do anything." Rihanna's gaze softened, and she took Emily's hand. "You're not alone," Rihanna said firmly. "I've told you this before and I mean it." True to her word, Rihanna took immediate action. Within just a few days, she arranged for a lawyer to help Emily secure temporary leave from her cleaning job, allowing her to care for her pregnancy while continuing her training without the worry of losing income. She also set up a meeting with a social worker specializing in dementia care, helping Emily access services for her mother that she had never known existed. Emily felt like she could finally breathe again, but not everyone was supportive. Rumors began circulating among the choir members that Emily was receiving special treatment because of Rihanna. The sharp whispers accused her of exploiting Rihanna's fame instead of earning her spot on her own. Emily overheard the gossip but pretended not to hear. She didn't have the energy to focus on it. One day, as she was leaving practice, she overheard two singers talking. "I don't understand why she's still here," one said. "She's pregnant and struggling to keep up. She should focus on being a mother rather than chasing a dream." Emily's steps faltered for a moment, but she pushed forward. That evening, Rihanna called her. "Are you okay?" Emily hesitated before responding truthfully. "I feel like I'm falling apart." "No, you're not," Rihanna said with conviction. "You're bending, but you're not breaking." Emily let the words sink in. She wanted to believe them, to feel strong again. The next day, Emily arrived at practice with renewed determination. She stayed late, pushing herself until her voice was hoarse. She studied the music more intently, forcing herself to the limit while blocking out the whispers. Gradually, the murmurs began to fade. One evening, after the group nailed a particularly challenging piece, the director looked at Emily and nodded. "Great job today," she said. It was a small compliment, but to Emily, it felt like a monumental achievement. She walked out of the studio that night with her head held a little higher, the weight on her shoulders slightly lighter. Still, the struggles weren't over. Emily knew there were many more battles ahead, more bills, more doubt, more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in a long while, she no longer felt like she was fighting alone. As she placed a hand on her growing belly and whispered a quiet promise to the baby inside, she knew she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for both of them. Emily stood at the edge of the stage, her heart pounding so hard it felt as though it might burst. The lights above cast a warm glow, creating long shadows on the polished floor. The audience hadn't arrived yet, but she could already imagine the hum of conversation, the rustle of programs, and the feeling of hundreds of eyes fixed on her. This was not the place she had cleaned every night, sweeping and mopping while humming tunes no one else could hear. Tonight, she wouldn't stand in the shadows. Tonight, she would stand under the stage lights, and that thought terrified her. Behind her, Rihanna stood observing, with the calm assurance that Emily had begun to rely on. She was dressed simply, yet radiated a quiet elegance that Emily had always admired. "Are you ready?" Rihanna asked. Emily turned to her, her voice trembling. Suppose I'm not ready?" "You can do this," Rihanna said with confidence. Emily wanted to believe her. She wanted to hold on to the faith Rihanna had in her, but doubts still echoed in her mind. What if my voice cracks? What if I freeze? What if everyone sees me as a pregnant woman, scared and out of place? But then Emily remembered everything she had done to get to this point, the long practice sessions until her throat ached, the mornings spent caring for her mother, balancing medication schedules and doctor appointments, the gossip about her appearance, her pregnancy, her worth, and how she had learned to tune it all out. She hadn't made it here by chance. She had fought for this moment, and she wouldn't waste it. The concert began with the choir singing group numbers, and Emily sang her part, blending her voice with the others, feeling steadier with each note. But her solo was approaching, and as the moment drew near, her anxiety surged once again. When the choir director called her name, Emily felt the world shift ever so slightly. She stepped forward, hands shaking, and positioned herself in front of the microphone. The lights dimmed, leaving only a warm golden glow surrounding her. She could barely make out the faces in the audience, but she knew Rihanna was standing off stage, watching. The first notes of the piano echoed through the auditorium, and Emily closed her eyes, beginning to sing. Her voice was delicate, tentative at first, but as the melody swelled, her confidence grew with it. She allowed herself to feel the music, the pain, the hope, the longing, and poured all of it into each note. By the time she reached the chorus, her voice soared, her fear falling away, replaced by something deeper, something that had been waiting to be set free. The room was silent, holding its breath, and when she finished the final note, applause erupted like a wave. Emily opened her eyes to see the audience standing, clapping, and wiping away tears. Her own eyes were moist, but this time, the tears weren't from fear or exhaustion. They were tears of pride. After the performance, Emily was surrounded by well-wishers, strangers who shared how her voice had touched their hearts. The choir director pulled her aside, saying she should consider auditioning for professional opportunities. Emily could hardly believe what was happening, but the most significant moment came afterward, when she found Rihanna waiting for her backstage. "You did it," Rihanna said, pulling her into a hug. Emily smiled, a sound of laughter escaping from her throat like something she hadn't heard in years. "I still can't believe it." "Believe it," Rihanna said, "because this is just the beginning." The following weeks passed in a blur. Videos of Emily's performance began circulating online, and soon, people were reaching out, producers, reporters, even old friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Emily's story resonated with people. They saw themselves in her struggle, her resilience, and her triumph. She began receiving invitations to sing at small events, and with Rihanna's help, she started recording more songs, building on the momentum she had created. But Emily didn't let the attention cloud her judgment. She still attended rehearsals, still cared for her mother, still prepared for the arrival of her child. She kept her focus, reminding herself that nothing came easy. She didn't forget the people who had doubted her. One day, at an event, she saw the woman who had suggested she focus on motherhood instead of pursuing music. Emily didn't approach her. She didn't need to. The expression on the woman's face as she watched Emily perform spoke volumes. Emily's success was the answer to all the harsh words, the rejection, and the moments of self-doubt. But what Emily cared about wasn't revenge, it was the feeling of finally being seen. Rihanna continued to support her quietly, never stepping into the spotlight. She introduced Emily, arranged meetings, and was always there when the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm her. One evening, after a long day at the studio, Emily sat across from Rihanna in a small cafe. "Why me?" Emily asked suddenly. Rihanna looked up, thoughtful. "Because I see myself in you." Emily blinked, surprised. Rihanna smiled. "I know what it's like to fight for a place in a world that doesn't always welcome you. I know what it feels like to think you're not enough, but you are, Emily. You always have been." Emily didn't know how to respond. Instead, she reached across the table and took Rihanna's hand. "Thank you," Emily whispered. Rihanna squeezed her hand. "Don't thank me, just keep moving forward." That night, Emily left the cafe feeling lighter than she had in months. She wasn't naive. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. But she also knew she could face them, because now, not only was she surviving, she was thriving, and she wasn't stopping. Emily sat in the hospital room, holding her newborn daughter in her arms. The soft hum of machines and the sounds of nurses in the hallway were the only interruptions to the silence. Her daughter's tiny fingers curled around her thumb, and Emily felt the tears slide down her cheeks, not from fear or exhaustion this time, but from an overwhelming sense of love and gratitude. She couldn't take her eyes off her daughter's face, tracing the soft lines of her little nose and chubby cheeks. She was perfect, perfect in a way that was almost unbelievable, and Emily felt the weight of everything she had been through to bring her into this world. The road to this moment hadn't been easy. There had been nights when Emily wondered if she could go on, when the weight of pregnancy and rebuilding her life seemed too much to bear. But now, looking at the tiny life in her arms, she knew every sacrifice had been worth it. A soft knock on the door drew Emily's attention. She looked up to see Rihanna entering, holding a small bouquet of flowers and wearing the warm, encouraging smile that Emily had gradually come to rely on. "She's beautiful," Rihanna said gently, stepping closer. Emily smiled, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Thank you," her voice quivered, but this time it was steady enough to convey her gratitude. "How are you feeling?" Rihanna asked, sitting down beside her. "A bit tired," Emily admitted, "but really good. Truly good." Rihanna leaned down to look at the baby. "Have you picked a name yet?" Emily hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Asha." Rihanna's gaze softened. "Perfect." The weeks following Asha's birth passed like a dream. Emily juggled late nights with her baby, doctor appointments, and rehearsals, but something inside her had shifted. She no longer felt like she was in a constant race just to survive. Now, she had a purpose, a reason to fight. Someone who was her reason to live, someone who had given her strength even on her hardest days. Rihanna remained a steady support, helping Emily navigate the changes in her life. But their relationship gradually shifted, evolving from mentorship to friendship. One afternoon, Rihanna invited Emily to a meeting at a local nonprofit organization. "This is where we start giving back," Rihanna said as they walked into the modest office space. Emily looked around, noticing posters on the walls depicting smiling mothers and children. "What is this place?" Emily asked. "A charity," Rihanna explained. "For single mothers, women who face the same struggles you did, discrimination, financial hardships, and lack of opportunity. We're building programs to support education, childcare, and job training." Emily turned to her, stunned. "You're doing all of this?" "We're doing it," Rihanna corrected, smiling. "Your story, your strength, will change many lives." Emily squinted, trying to hold back tears. She couldn't believe that her struggles could be of any help to others. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked. Rihanna squeezed her hand. "You're more ready than anyone." The organization grew rapidly, attracting media attention and donations. Emily's story became a symbol of resilience, and people from across the country shared their own stories. Emily began attending events, sharing her journey in an inspiring way, offering hope to others. She used her platform not only to inspire but also to call for change, exposing the systemic barriers that made it difficult for women like her to succeed. Throughout it all, she continued to sing. Her music became a reflection of her life, a blend of struggle and triumph that resonated with her audience. With Rihanna's support, she recorded her debut album, a collection of songs about loss, love, and hope. The release was critically acclaimed, and Emily found herself performing on stages she had once only dreamed of. But even as her career flourished, she didn't lose sight of what mattered most. One evening, after a performance, Emily sat backstage with Asha sleeping in her arms. She looked down at her daughter, feeling a peace she hadn't known for years. Rihanna walked in, still glowing from the performance, ready for the next event. "You ready for the next one?" she teased, leaning against the makeup counter. Emily smiled softly. "Always." But as she looked at Rihanna, her expression grew serious. "I couldn't do this without you." Rihanna shook her head. "You've done it all. I've just been reminding you what you're capable of." Emily smiled, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "You've done that very well." Rihanna reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from Asha's face. "She's so lucky to have you." "No," Emily whispered, looking down at her daughter, "I'm the lucky one." Emily's life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still tough days, sleepless nights with Asha, mornings when the weight of her responsibilities felt overwhelming. But now, Emily knew she could face them. She knew she was strong enough. She knew she wasn't alone in this fight. Rihanna had always been by her side, a guiding light, helping her rediscover herself when darkness threatened to take over. And more importantly, Emily had found strength within her own heart, from the sacrifices, the tears, and from the love she had for her daughter. And when she stepped onto the stage again, this time with Asha standing just off stage, her bright eyes following her mother, Emily knew her journey had only just begun. Emily was no longer the woman afraid of failure. She had transformed into a mother, a woman of strength, confidence, and unwavering determination. She sang with a conviction that came from knowing that every moment on that stage was the result of years of resilient struggle. Her voice echoed throughout the hall, and somewhere in the crowd, another young woman sat listening, someone who had once been told she wasn't good enough, someone who had once felt so small. And perhaps, just perhaps, that woman would leave the event with a stronger belief in herself, because sometimes all it takes is one voice to remind someone of their own potential. This story serves as a reminder of the power of resilience, self-belief, and the importance of supporting one another. Have you ever felt like you weren't strong enough, but then found the motivation to push through? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story could inspire others and create positive change. If you find the story meaningful, don't hesitate to share it with friends and loved ones, so together, we can spread the message of resilience and the belief in our ability to overcome challenges. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.